Good morning. How are the prostitutes? Sounds like a rather unusual greeting for an assembly in church, doesn't it? Well, there was a scripture scholar in London. I had the opportunity of hearing him give a lecture right towards the end of his career of teaching when I was on sabbatical a few years ago. And that's how he began every class, every lecture. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. How are the prostitutes? He did this because he said that this was really the core of the gospel message. Jesus' concern for the downtrodden, the poor, the forgotten, the outcast, and that included, of course, the prostitutes. He wasn't making a moral judgment on the seminarians in his class or on the audience of his lecture or on this congregation this morning. What he really wanted to focus on was the heart, the core of Jesus' message. I don't know if they still have them, but when I was a student, we had things called Cliff Notes. You didn't use it because you didn't want to read the book. You just used it for review. Yeah, that was it, for review of the novel that you were supposed to have read. But the point of the Cliff Notes was it boiled down the plot, the summary. If we were to find a cliff note of all of Jesus' teaching, it would be here in this gospel passage from Matthew that we heard this morning, the two great commandments of love. Of course, Jesus is really quoting from the Hebrew Scriptures. He's quoting from the book of Deuteronomy, the great Shema Israel. Love God completely, totally, with your whole mind, your whole heart, your whole being. It's what faithful Jews have attached to the door of their house, at their lintel. It's what they tape on their forehead or on their arm. It's what they seek to get into their heart. And then, of course, the unique brilliance of Jesus adding to that and making part of that, this section of Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. The Jewish rabbis at the time of Jesus would always argue about what was the greatest commandment, and to the original Decalogue they added another 603 interpretations. So there were 613 possible laws that they could say was the most important. But Jesus says the most important law is love. Now, in English, we have a very wide vocabulary, but unfortunately, we only have one word for love. Oh, I love your hair. I love your new car. I love chicken soup. I love fall. We use it for everything, and that kind of flattens it out. Greek, which has a much smaller vocabulary, the Koine Greek, in which the Gospels were written, has not one, but three words for love. The first word is eros. It means passionate love. It means carnal love. It could be love of two very devoted people, husband and wife. It might be just carnal love, again, going back to the prostitutes. It's that level of intimacy, one-on-one. It could be for good or it could be for ill. We get our word erotic from eros. The second layer of love, or the second circle of love, is philia. It means brotherly love, the love of those that we're related to by friendship or by kinship. We get our word Philadelphia, the city Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. The third love is agape. That's what Jesus is talking about. Agape is a self-giving love that is committed to the good of the beloved. Not the lover, the beloved. This is the kind of love that Jesus, of course, exemplifies ultimately on the cross, the total giving of self. This is what Jesus is talking about in this commandment of love. We see it, for example, in, the mother who, just recently, you may have seen it on television, refused to be treated for the cancer that was riddling her body because it would have destroyed the life of her unborn child. And so she gave birth to the child, was able to hold that child for just a few minutes before she died. That's agape. Or the soldier who throws himself down on an IED to save his platoon. He sacrifices his life for the sake of his fellow soldiers. Or the bone marrow or kidney marrow donor who gives part of themselves, part of their very life, their very flesh, to maybe a complete stranger to save a life. That's agape. That's that kind of giving. That's what we're called to. Now, the scriptures today are very, very concerned about this love. Love extending really to all. That's what God's love is extending to. Not just one-on-one like eros, or even to those that we have to love because they're family or friends, but this kind of disinterested commitment of love even to the stranger. We hear that in that first reading from the Hebrew Scriptures from the book of Exodus today. You shall not molest or oppress an alien. Does that sound familiar? That was written thousands of years ago, but you know, if you listen to those debates that are going on now in preparation for the election, we're hearing a lot about illegal aliens, aren't we? It's not such a distant, faraway problem. It's a problem for today. How do we treat the alien? Do we treat them as a stranger, or do we treat them as our sister and brother in God's family? The great German Jewish philosopher Edith Stein, who became a Christian Catholic and then a Carmelite cloistered nun, and eventually was killed at a concentration camp because of her Jewish roots, had this to say. She said, "For the Christian, there is no stranger, no strange human being. He is in every instance the neighbor, whom we have with us and who is most in need of us." Now listen to this. She says, "It makes no difference whether he is related or not, whether we like him or not, whether he is morally worthy of our help or not. The love of Christ knows no bounds. It never ceases, never withdraws in the face of hatred or foul play. He came for the sake of sinners and not for the righteous. If the love of Christ lives in us, then we do as he did and seek after the lost sheep." The scriptures that we hear today, first of all, should be a great consolation for all of us, because all of us are sinners. And the gospel message is that no sinner is such a great sinner that we can't be redeemed by the love of God. So never, never, never think that you are unworthy of God's love and forgiveness. God is there to love you and to forgive you and to give you life. But then the corollary of that is, of course, that we have to extend the same love and the same forgiveness to others. And it means that things have to change. Things have to change in us, and things have to change in society. That's why Jesus was such a threat, not because he was preaching about some type of romantic, sentimental, emotional love, but he was talking about love that really would change the world, because it would change society. The scripture scholar Walter Brueggemann says that compassion, love for others, particularly for the one in need, is the defining quality of the life and message of Jesus. He has this to say, that Jesus, in his solidarity with the marginal one, is moved to compassion. And compassion constitutes a radical form of criticism, for it announces that the hurt is to be taken seriously, that the hurt is not acceptable as normal and natural, but is abnormal and an unacceptable condition for humanness. In other words, when one of our sisters or brothers suffers, the world has to change. So the question for us then, of course, has to remain tonight, how are the prostitutes? This morning, how are the prostitutes? This afternoon, how are the orphans? How are the widows? How are the illegal aliens? How are the drug addicts? How are the starving children who will go to bed tonight with no food? How are they? And how can their world be different? Because we know we're loved by God, and that it's through us that God's love